Good morning, and thank you for being a Patreon member. We're in the greenhouse today on this fantastic, beautiful time of year, and I wanted to show you something that helps you with your 15 minutes a day, and it's about compost. How do we know what to do in our garden? If you're making compost, then that's probably going to take you more than 15 minutes a day, because when you turn the compost is going to take you probably 15, 20, 30 minutes to turn it, depending on how big it is and what's going on. But how do you actually know what to do and when to turn? You turn the compost when the thermometer tells you to. If you don't have a composter, then get one. Get a thermometer. You can get them off of Amazon for 80 bucks, 90 bucks. So they're not cheap, but they'll last forever. And this is saying 162 degrees. We're going to turn this compost. This has been turned several times. And this is part of your gardening system that is probably outside of the realm of your 15 minutes a day. So what does 15 minutes a day actually mean? What does it mean, 15 minutes a day? Here's what it means. It means you have an appropriate sized garden for your family. So here's my garden behind me. This is a garden we created in boot camp. This garden was made where the daffodils and alfalfa is growing prevalently. That was last year's spring boot camp we made. And behind me where you can just see some transplants in there with the new detritus sphere on top. We put it right next to the old one, but that was our boot camp garden for this year. So this is an appropriate sized garden for a 15-minute a day garden. So this garden, 10 feet long, 10 to 12 feet long, and about 9 feet wide. So this would produce an amazing amount of food for a family if they were managing it in a really tight, nice way, so that your transplants are ready to go in as soon as you harvest something. So this could be producing a lot of food. And in 15 minutes a day, you will be completely managed exactly how you choose to manage. Because that is plenty of time for one person to keep any weeds out, to keep great diversity, to be planting, to be transplanting. So this is good. How big of a garden could a person manage on 15 minutes a day? Probably a garden 10 times this big. That would be my guess from my experience. I think you could do 10 of these gardens for 15 minutes a day, because once you get it established, which takes some time, it'll take a little bit longer because you have some longer projects, and then harvesting can take longer. If you're going to be freeze drying food, cooking food, that doesn't count in the 15 minutes. So what do we do with this garden today? Well, as you can see, there's only a few transplants in here that are doing very good. So I would come out here, and you always want to attack your garden work like it's an Olympic sport, because that means you don't need a gym membership, because you get your heart rate up and you work hard and you get the work done. So we would come out here and we would say, okay, I have several plants that did not survive the transplanting of boot camp, but I have some lettuces in there, I have some green onions in there that are growing good, and I have a few alfalfa plants. So the first thing I do is I observe and I say, this is not growing what it needs to grow. I have empty space. Anytime you have empty space in the garden, you need to cover that empty space with plant material. One of the simple soil health principles is keep your living roots in the soil all the time. So if you have empty space, you automatically know what to do. Fill it up with a plant. So what I would do is run into the greenhouse, and I would find a tray of food, and whatever food would grow appropriately this time of year. So in my climate, lettuce, onions, any of the cole crops, which means broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale. So any of those could go in. We could even get Brussels sprouts in at this time of year. So in my climate, in this climate. And so we need to come in here and then just put them in here. And so that would take me about I think I could do that in 6 minutes. Could run in there, grab a couple of trays of plants, bring them out here with my dibble, poke holes in this detritus sphere. That just means the mulch on top. And then we put them down in, and then I would take my trays back in there and take care of them. Now my 6-7 minutes is over. And then I would grab a softball size handful of compost, and I would mix that with a 5-gallon bucket of water. And then I would come out here and I would inoculate and water in all my transplants that I planted. And that would take about 5 or 6 minutes. So let's just say we're at 12 minutes. What am I going to do for the next 3 minutes to get to 15 minutes? I'll put my watering stuff away. That'll take a minute. So now I have 4 more minutes. Now I'm going to come out and I'm going to observe. So I'm going to look at this garden real close that I have filled up with all my plants, which it really isn't. I'm just talking about it. And so I would say, okay, did I fill in all the spaces? And if yes, fantastic, because I did it right, because I'm an Olympian gardener. And then I just come around and I say, well, you know what, there's a weed, and you get it out. And you look around and you say, well, there's some other weeds, and you get them out. You say, this would look better if I mowed around it. Well, mowing your lawn is not within your 15 minutes, but it does impact your lawn. And so it took you about 1 minute to do a good observation. Now we're at 3 minutes left. What are you going to do for 3 more minutes? Now you're going to get creative and say, what would happen in this garden to produce me more food? What plants will be harvested soon? See all that alfalfa? That alfalfa is growing big and beautiful. Is it shading anything out? Yeah, actually it is. Under this alfalfa plant right here, if we pull it back, there is a perennial herb there. That's thyme that's trying to come up. So I need to cut this alfalfa out, feed that to my laying hens, because chickens love alfalfa and they'll lay good eggs. Or you feed it to the milk cow because the cow gives you milk and they need alfalfa. Now look at this one here. It's not as shaded, but there's right there where my toe is. That's a sage plant that's trying to grow. So I probably should take this alfalfa out. Now, am I killing it? No, I'm cutting it off, just like a hayfield. So I'm going to come in here and cut this off. So it took me a long time to explain that, but it only took me a half of 1 second to know what to do. So you whip out your pocket knife, because you always carry a pocket knife with you anytime you're in the garden. And we would cut this off really quick, and that would take maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And we cut off all this alfalfa. We throw it in the worm bin to feed the worms, or we feed the laying hens to get eggs, or we feed the milk cow or any other kind of livestock. Maybe you have goats, maybe you have sheep, but the earthworms will love it. If you're collecting alfalfa for compost, then dry it. Just lay it out somewhere where it can dry like hay. And then after 10 or 15 cuttings of this, which would be years, but because you get like anywhere from 3 to 6, 8 cuttings a year, depending on your climate. Well, you would dry it like hay and keep it dry. Keep it safe in a barn, a garage, whatever. And then when you get enough, that's your 10% high nitrogen for your compost, so that your compost reaches 160 degrees. And then that only, see here again, that took a long time to explain, but I knew that. I knew what I was doing with it as soon as I cut it. So we're talking 30 seconds. My 15 minutes is basically up now. So what did I do in 15 minutes? I observed this garden. I saw that there were holes that were empty. I ran to the greenhouse. I brought transplants. I filled it in. I made up an inoculant of compost. I watered the transplants in with an inoculant. And then I cut out 1 or 2 weeds that I found. And then I removed the alfalfa and I fed my worm bin the alfalfa, or whatever appropriate thing you're going to do. Hopefully this helps you to maximize your 15 minutes a day to keep the bugs and weeds away.